The lock on my dead mother's attic door had been broken exactly once in 40 years. By me, 3 weeks after her funeral, with a crowbar shaking in my hands. What I found behind it wasn't dust and old Christmas decorations. It was a fireproof safe, a year of secret emails, and proof that my husband and my own sister had been counting down the days until my mother's mind failed completely, so they could take everything before I even understood what was happening. My name is Colette Marsh. I'm 46 years old, a hospice nurse of 19 years, and until that October afternoon, I believed grief was the worst thing my family would ever hand me. I was wrong. This is the story of the 18 months I spent keeping my mother alive and comfortable, while two people I trusted more than anyone on earth were quietly drafting a plan to profit from her decline, and the 4 months it took me to make sure they answered for every single word of it in a room they couldn't walk out of. Part 1. The Weight of Being the One Who Stays. My mother, Irene Whitfield, was diagnosed with vascular dementia when she was 71. I remember the exact moment the neurologist said the word irreversible. Dana sitting beside me in the waiting room, scrolling her phone, barely looking up. I was the one who asked the follow-up questions. I was the one who wrote down the medication schedule. I was the one who, 6 months later, took an unpaid leave of absence from St. Agatha's Medical Center to move into my mother's guest room full-time, because by then, she could no longer be trusted alone with a stovetop, let alone a bank account. Dana visited on weekends, sometimes. She lived 40 minutes away, ran a small event planning business, and always had a reason, a client emergency, a headache, a rough week, for why she couldn't come more often. I never resented her for it out loud. I told myself caregiving wasn't a competition, that showing up looked different for different people, that Dana loved Mom in her own way. I told myself a lot of things that year that turned out to be lies I'd built to protect myself from a truth I wasn't ready to see. My husband, Preston, was a different kind of absence. He was physically present, home every night, sitting across from me at dinner, sleeping beside me. But something in him had gone quiet and calculating in a way I couldn't name yet. He asked about Mom's house more than he asked about Mom. "What's the place worth these days?" he'd say, refilling his wine glass, voice casual in a way that should have registered as strange, and didn't, because grief exhaustion has a way of dulling every alarm bell in your body. Looking back now, I can see the entire architecture of what they built, brick by brick, over 18 months. But in the moment, living inside it, all I could see was my mother's hands shaking as she tried to button her own cardigan, her eyes searching my face for a name she used to know without thinking. I didn't have room left in me to suspect anyone. I was too busy trying to keep one woman tethered to the world a little longer. Mom passed on a Tuesday morning in early September, quietly, in her own bed, the way she'd asked to go years earlier when she could still form the request herself. I was holding her hand. Dana arrived 40 minutes after the funeral home did. Preston sent flowers to the service, but somehow couldn't clear his schedule to help carry a single box during the cleanup that followed. I told myself even then that grief looks different on everyone. I was still telling myself that lie 3 weeks later, standing at the base of the attic stairs with a crowbar in my hand, about to learn exactly how wrong I'd been. Part 2. The Suspiciously Generous Sister. The house, a 2-story colonial on Birchwood Lane in Ann Arbor, the house Dana and I had both grown up in, needed to be cleared out and listed before winter. Dana volunteered for the job with an eagerness that, at the time, I mistook for guilt-driven generosity. "I know a great realtor," she told me the week after the funeral, the first of at least 3 times she'd repeat that exact sentence over the following 2 weeks. "Let me handle the paperwork, Colette. You've done enough. You deserve a break." I remember feeling a small, warm flicker of gratitude. Finally, I thought, she's stepping up. She sent me the name of the realtor almost immediately, Wade Kessler, a man I'd never heard of, working out of a boutique agency 2 towns over that specialized, according to his website, in fast-track probate and estate sales. I didn't think much of it. Estate sales are common enough. Families use realtors who specialize in them all the time. What I didn't know what I wouldn't learn for another 3 weeks, was that Wade Kessler's name had already appeared months earlier in a private email thread between my sister and my husband, discussing a clean, quiet, fast transaction for a property neither of them yet had any legal claim to. Preston's behavior during that same window took on a texture I still find nauseating to think about now. He started bringing up kitchen renovations at dinner. Hypothetically, he'd say, once things settle with your mom's estate. He asked twice whether the house had any structural issues that might tank the appraisal. He mentioned offhand that the market for older colonials in our area was hot right now, historically hot, and that we shouldn't drag our feet. I remember thinking he was just being practical, the way he'd always been the numbers person in our marriage, the one who tracked our retirement accounts and negotiated our mortgage refinance without complaint. I told myself his mind going straight to logistics was simply how Preston processed loss, through spreadsheets instead of tears. I didn't yet understand that he wasn't processing anything. He was executing a plan that had already been drafted, dated, and discussed in writing for the better part of a year. Part 3. The lock that had never been opened. The attic door had been locked for as long as I could remember. My mother kept the key on a thin gold chain around her neck, tucked beneath her blouse, even in her final year when she could barely remember her own birthday. I used to think it was sentimental. My father's old military trunk was up there, along with what I assumed were decades of Christmas ornaments and photo albums, too painful for her to look at, but too precious to throw away. After she died, none of us could find the key. I searched her jewelry box, her nightstand, the lining of her favorite coat. Dana suggested, almost too quickly, that we simply leave the attic for now and focus on the rest of the house. I remember thinking that was strange even then, a small, unplaceable itch at the back of my mind. But I let it go, because grief makes you generous with your own suspicion, gives everyone the benefit of every doubt, right up until it can't anymore. It was the realtor, ironically, who forced the issue. Wade Kessler needed full access to the house for listing photos, attic included, to accurately represent the square footage. Dana called me the week after that request, her voice tighter than usual. "Just leave it," she said. "It's probably empty anyway, not worth the hassle of breaking a 40-year-old lock." That sentence, "not worth the hassle," is the one that finally cracked something open in me. Because my sister does not use words like hassle carelessly. Dana chooses her words the way she chooses her client invoices, precisely, defensively, always with an angle. And something about her insistence that I not open that door lodged itself under my skin and refused to leave. I went to the hardware store the next morning and bought a crowbar. Part 4. What was behind the door? The attic smelled like cedar and dust and 40 years of things nobody had touched. Afternoon light slanted through the small round window at the far end, illuminating drifting particles like something out of a memory I didn't yet know I was about to have. Old furniture sat draped under white sheets. Boxes were stacked chest-high along one wall, my father's things from before he passed a decade earlier, my own childhood trophies, a rocking horse missing one ear. And in the far corner, half hidden behind a rolled-up Persian rug, sat a small, fireproof safe I had never once seen in my life. It wasn't locked. My mother, in the fog of her final months, had apparently either forgotten to secure it, or someone else had already been up here and hadn't bothered to lock it back. I still don't know which possibility unsettles me more. Inside, the first thing I found was a property appraisal, professionally bound, dated 4 months before my mother's death. It valued the Birchwood Lane house at $380,000, nearly $60,000 above what any of us had assumed it was worth. Underneath it sat a partially completed power of attorney form, my mother's shaky signature attempted twice and crossed out once, dated during a period when her dementia diagnosis had already been confirmed for 8 months. The form named Dana as sole decision-maker over all of Mom's finances and property. And beneath that, printed and stapled together with careful precision, as though someone had wanted a hard copy for exactly this eventuality, was an email thread. Dana Whitfield Reyes and Preston Marsh, my sister and my husband, spanning nearly 11 months. I sat down on the dusty attic floor because my legs simply stopped working the way legs are supposed to. The earliest message, dated the previous December, was from Dana. Doctor confirmed it's progressing faster than they initially thought. We should start thinking about the house situation before things get complicated with paperwork. Preston's reply, 2 days later. Agreed. Let's not rush anything that raises flags. Better to wait for a window where she's still lucid enough to sign, but confused enough not to ask too many questions. Talk to Wade about timing. I read that sentence 4 times before it fully landed. My husband had used the phrase, confused enough not to ask too many questions, about my mother's declining mind, in writing, to my sister, nearly a year before either of them had said a single word to me. The thread continued for months. References to the timeline. References to Colette's distracted with the caregiving, good cover for now. A message from Dana, dated during the week of Mom's second hospitalization for a minor stroke. Reading, she's getting worse, fast. This might actually work in our favor sooner than we thought. I'll bring the POA by this weekend while Colette's at the hospital pharmacy. I remembered that week. I remembered sitting in a vinyl chair beside my mother's hospital bed, holding her hand through a seizure of confusion and fear, while 40 minutes away, my sister was driving toward the house with a legal document designed to strip my dying mother of her financial autonomy, timed deliberately around my own absence. The last message in the folder, dated 6 weeks before Mom passed, was from Preston. POA attempt didn't work. She got upset and Dana backed off. We'll have to wait for probate now. Slower, but cleaner legally. Wade says fast-track probate sales are still very doable if we move quick after she's gone. Let's not mention any of this to Colette until the estate's settled. No reason to complicate things. No reason to complicate things. My own husband had written that sentence about hiding a financial conspiracy from me, his wife of 14 years, regarding my own mother's death. Part 5. The first call I made. I didn't cry in that attic. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect the crying to come first, and for me, it didn't. What came first was a strange, cold clarity. The same clarity I use at work when a patient's vitals start crashing and there's no time left for feelings, only for the next correct action. I photographed every page. Careful angles, clean lighting, timestamps visible in the corner of each frame. Then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, closed the safe, and climbed down from the attic like a woman who hadn't just discovered her family was built on a lie. I called my cousin Renata that same afternoon. She'd worked as a paralegal for 11 years and had helped me navigate the early guardianship paperwork when Mom's diagnosis first came in. She listened without interrupting as I read her the key lines from the email thread, her silence growing heavier with every sentence. Colette, she finally said, this isn't family drama anymore. This is elder financial exploitation, potentially undue influence on a diagnosed dementia patient, and depending on what else you find, possibly fraud. You need an estate litigation attorney, today, not next week. She gave me a name, Marguerite Okafor, an attorney downtown who specialized in exactly this kind of case, the ugly, quiet kind that families prefer to bury rather than litigate. I sat in my car outside Renata's office for 20 minutes before I could make myself drive home, because I knew that once I walked back through my own front door, I'd have to sit across from Preston at dinner and pretend, for the first time in our marriage, that I didn't already know everything. Part 6. Playing the long game. Marguerite Okafor's office overlooked the county courthouse, case files stacked with the kind of precision that told me immediately she didn't miss details. She read through my photograph documents twice, in complete silence, before finally looking up. This power of attorney was never fully executed, she said. No notary signature, no witness, which tells me your mother either refused outright or she was too impaired by the time they made a real attempt and they abandoned it. That's actually good news for you. It means the fraud attempt failed. But the email correspondence is what matters most here. It demonstrates clear, premeditated intent to financially exploit a diagnosed dementia patient. That's a federal and state elder abuse violation, separate entirely from any civil dispute over the estate. She laid out a plan with the same clinical precision I use when triaging a patient. Step 1. Secure the original documents somewhere neither Dana nor Preston could access. A safe deposit box under my name alone. Step 2. Request my mother's complete medical records to establish an undeniable timeline, proving her diagnosis predated every single email by months. Step 3. File a formal probate objection immediately, freezing any potential sale before Wade Kessler could list the property. Has your sister already engaged this realtor formally? Marguerite asked. She sent me his listing paperwork last week, I said, asked for my signature. Then we move today. Don't sign anything Dana sends you. Not yet. Let her believe you're simply grieving and disorganized. The calmer you appear, the more careless they'll become. People who think they're winning make mistakes. People who suspect they've been caught don't. I left her office with a folder of instructions and a version of myself I didn't fully recognize yet. Someone who had stopped reacting and started strategizing. Part 7. The performance. For the following 2.5 weeks, I became the exhausted, grieving, slightly disorganized sister they both expected me to be. Dana texted listing paperwork with cheerful urgency. Just need your signature here, sis. Wade thinks we can close within 6 weeks if we move now. I replied with vague apologies about needing a little more time, citing exhaustion, citing grief, citing the sheer weight of sorting through Mom's belongings. She didn't push. Her confidence in the timeline they'd built over 11 months made her patient in exactly the way Marguerite predicted. Preston, meanwhile, grew almost tender, bringing home takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, suggesting weekend trips once the estate settles, mentioning more than once ideas for our share of the proceeds. I nodded along at dinner, cataloging every sentence in my head like vitals on a chart, watching a man I'd shared 14 years with reveal, piece by piece, exactly how long he'd been planning a future that required my mother's death and my ignorance in equal measure. Marguerite's office, working alongside Renata, obtained my mother's complete medical records within 10 days. The documentation was devastating in its clarity. Mom's vascular dementia diagnosis was formally confirmed 14 months before her death, a full 3 months before the earliest email in Dana and Preston's thread. There was no ambiguity left to argue. They hadn't stumbled into an opportunity after her decline began. They had watched it happen and started planning around it from the very beginning. Marguerite filed the formal probate objection on a Thursday morning, along with a request for a lien of inquiry against the Birchwood Lane property, freezing any potential sale pending investigation. The filing became public record that same afternoon. Dana called me 4 hours later, her voice sharper than I'd heard it in years. "What did you do, Colette? Wade just called. The sale's completely frozen. Do you have any idea how much money we're losing every single week this sits in limbo?" "We?" I repeated quietly, letting the word sit exactly as long as it needed to. "I don't remember agreeing to sell Mom's house to fund a plan you and Preston built together while she was still alive and still capable of understanding what you were doing to her." The silence on the other end of the line lasted 11 full seconds. I counted them, the way I'd counted the minutes in that hospital chair months earlier. In that silence, I understood with total certainty that Dana had no idea I'd found the safe, which meant, for the first time since December, I finally had something they didn't, the whole picture. Part 8, the first twist. It wasn't just the house. Marguerite called me 8 days later with something that turned my stomach in an entirely new direction. While reviewing my mother's full financial records as part of the probate objection, her office had uncovered 3 wire transfers from Mom's primary checking account, each for $4,000, spaced 2 months apart, made during the final year of her life, all routed to an LLC registered under a name I didn't recognize, Birchwood Property Solutions. The registered agent for that LLC was Wade Kessler. The listed managing member, buried 3 layers deep in the filing paperwork, was Preston. My husband hadn't just been planning to profit from the house sale after Mom's death. He had already been quietly draining her checking account for over a year, funneling $12,000 through a shell company he'd personally set up with the realtor named in his own emails to my sister, while my mother, unable to track her own finances anymore, had no idea money was leaving her account at all. I confronted Preston that night, not with the safe's contents yet, but with the wire transfers alone, testing exactly how far his lies would stretch. He claimed, without missing a beat, that the money was for professional consulting fees related to Irene's estate planning. A lie so smooth and immediate that it told me everything about how many times he must have rehearsed it in his head, waiting for the day I'd ask. "Show me the consulting agreement then," I said. He couldn't produce one, because there wasn't one. There was only a plan, executed in cash, drained quietly from a woman who could no longer count her own change. Part 9. The Reading of the Will. The estate attorney scheduled the formal reading of my mother's will for late October, a meeting Dana and Preston had both pushed aggressively to expedite, clearly hoping to resolve the estate before what they still believed was my grief-induced disorganization caused further delays. Marguerite attended with me. Dana brought her own attorney, a nervous young associate who looked like he'd been handed the file that morning. Preston sat beside Dana at the conference table, not beside me, a detail that told the entire room everything before a single document was opened. The estate attorney read through the will's standard provisions first. The house to be split evenly between Dana and me, Mom's modest savings divided the same way, a handful of sentimental items designated by name. Then Marguerite requested the floor. "Before we finalize any distribution," she said, laying a folder on the polished table with the calm of someone who had done this 100 times, "I'd like to submit evidence relevant to attempted undue influence and elder financial exploitation, which materially affects how these proceeds should be handled and distributed." She placed copies of the email thread on the table first. Dana's face drained of every trace of color. Then Marguerite placed the wire transfer records beside them, along with the LLC filing bearing Preston's name. "This is a private family matter," Preston said, his voice tight in a way I'd never heard before. "It became a legal matter," Marguerite replied without raising her voice, "the moment you and Mrs. Marsh's sister attempted to secure a power of attorney from a diagnosed dementia patient, timed specifically around her decreasing cognitive capacity, and subsequently withdrew $12,000 from her account through a shell company registered in your name." Dana's young attorney requested a recess. Marguerite didn't blink. "We're prepared to proceed with a formal complaint to Adult Protective Services, a report to the State Attorney General's Elder Fraud Division, and a petition for a constructive trust over any improperly directed proceeds, unless we can resolve this appropriately today." The room went silent. In that particular way rooms go silent when a bluff has been called and there's nothing left underneath it to bluff with. Part 10. The second twist. Dana turns. What happened next, I hadn't fully anticipated, though Marguerite later told me she'd seen it a dozen times before. Faced with the weight of federal fraud exposure, Dana's attorney requested a private conversation with his client. 20 minutes later, Dana returned to the table alone. Preston had stepped out to take a call, though I suspected he simply couldn't stomach staying in the room. "I want to cooperate," Dana said, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. "Preston came to me with this. The wire transfers were his idea. He told me it was already handled financially, and that I just needed to help with the POA and the house sale. I didn't know about the LLC money until just now, Colette. I swear to you, I didn't know how much he'd already taken." I wanted to believe her completely. Some small, exhausted part of me still does. But I'd learned enough over the previous 6 weeks to know that "I didn't know everything" is a very different sentence from "I didn't know anything." Dana had known enough to draft a power of attorney form. She had known enough to recommend a realtor whose name appeared in a fraud scheme 11 months before any legal claim existed on the property. Ignorance, in her case, had clear, documented edges. Still, her cooperation mattered. With her attorney's guidance, Dana agreed to provide a signed statement confirming Preston had initiated the plan, along with the full history of their communications, evidence that, according to Marguerite, would prove critical in isolating exactly how much of the $12,000 Preston alone had personally directed into his own accounts, separate from any joint marital assets. Part 11. What the forensic accountant found. Marguerite brought in a forensic accountant, a quiet, precise woman named Odalis Farran to trace the LLC's financial trail before the divorce proceedings began in earnest. What she found was the third and sharpest twist of the entire ordeal. Of the $12,000 wired from my mother's account, only $3,000 had ever touched anything resembling legitimate consulting work, a single payment to Wade Kessler for a preliminary property valuation, the appraisal I'd found in the safe. The remaining $9,000 had been transferred in 3 separate installments into a personal checking account Preston had opened 18 months earlier, an account I had never known existed, held at a different bank than the ones we shared, with statements mailed to his office address instead of our home. That account held more than the money from my mother's checking. It held nearly $22,000 in total, accumulated over 2 years, including deposits that matched almost exactly to withdrawals from our own joint savings account. Withdrawals I'd noticed occasionally over the past 2 years and always accepted his explanation for: a work bonus reinvestment, a conference fee, a tax payment adjustment. Small enough individually, never to question. Devastating in aggregate, once laid out on Odalis's spreadsheet in front of me. My husband had been quietly building a private financial cushion for over 2 years, funded partly by our joint marital assets, and in its final phase, partly by my dying mother's checking account. All in preparation for a future he had never once discussed with me, timed around an inheritance he assumed I'd be too devastated and too distracted to scrutinize. Part 12. The confrontation that ended it. I didn't wait for another courtroom for this one. I brought everything home. The emails, the wire transfers, Odalis's spreadsheet, the hidden account statements, and laid them across our kitchen table the way Marguerite had laid them across that conference table weeks earlier. Preston came home from work to find me sitting there, waiting, in the same kitchen where he'd once brought home Thai food and talked hypothetically about kitchen renovations. "We need to talk," I said. And for the first time in our marriage, I watched real fear cross his face. Not performative concern, not rehearsed damage control, but the specific, cornered fear of a man realizing every door out of a room has quietly closed behind him. He tried, briefly, the same tactics he'd used with the wire transfers, reframing, minimizing, calling it financial planning that had simply gotten complicated. I let him talk until he ran out of words, and then I slid the hidden account statement across the table, the one mailed to his office, the one he'd never once mentioned in 14 years of marriage. "There's no version of this," I said, "where you explain your way out of a secret bank account funded partly by my mother's checking while she couldn't remember her own name." He didn't try again after that. Part 13. Resolution. Dana settled with the estate 2 weeks later, agreeing to a reduced share of the inheritance and a formal, notarized acknowledgement of her role, filed with the probate court as part of the resolution. She avoided criminal charges by cooperating fully and returning her portion of the wire-transferred funds. But our relationship has not recovered, and I'm honest enough with myself now to know it likely never will. Grief revealed something in her I can't unsee. Preston and I separated within the month. The divorce proceedings, guided by Odalis's forensic accounting, resulted in a settlement that accounted for every dollar he'd diverted, including a court-ordered restitution to my mother's estate for the funds taken while she was alive, treated legally and explicitly as elder financial exploitation, not simple marital asset mismanagement. He moved out in November. I haven't spoken to him since the final settlement conference. I kept the house on Birchwood Lane. Not to sell it quickly for the fast, quiet profit they'd once planned, but to sit in it for a while on my own terms, walking through rooms that still faintly smell like my mother's lavender soap, deciding for myself, finally, what those walls are worth to me, now that no one else gets a vote. Some evenings I still climb the attic stairs, though the safe is empty now, sitting in an evidence locker downtown as part of the closed case file. I go up there anyway, sometimes, just to sit in the quiet and remember that the truth was always up there, waiting behind a lock 2 people hoped I'd never think to break. If this story stayed with you, tell me where you're listening from. And if you've ever discovered that the people closest to you were building something behind your back while you were busy holding everything else together, know that you're not alone. I want to hear how you found your own locked door. We have many more stories like this one waiting, real, raw, and hopeful. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Let's keep walking through these moments together.